First, let me set up some background to make the flow of the story smoother. This happened almost 19 years ago. I was nearly 13 years old at the time, and I was being raised by my grandparents. We lived in a little tourist town in Florida. They had problems with their 2 daughters as adults, my mother being the older of the 2, and they wanted to do everything that they could to make sure that I didn't turn out the same way. A do-over, if you will. Needless to say, they were very strict. My aunt was having a good period. She had her stuff together, and we were all close. My aunt understood what it was like to be raised under a glass dome, metaphorically speaking. They had raised her too, after all. So being as she was my only aunt, she made sure that the time we spent together was always super cool. I would stay over Saturday nights. We would go out and hang out at the pier, and she would let me hang out with my middle school boyfriend, who would find ways to get to wherever I was. My grandparents had no idea of any of these activities, of course. I was just spending some quality time with my aunt and giving them a break. It was nice that I had a younger female figure, since my mom wasn't in the picture. One night, when we were out having fun, my aunt meets this guy, and they really hit it off. He was very nice and introduced himself to me. He went by JR, and at first was a kind and charming talker. They exchanged numbers after hanging out for a while, and then we went home and went to bed. They ended up going out a bit more, and my aunt ended up really liking JR. He took her to his home and introduced her to his father, and showed her around his land. He lived out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. I've lived in this town for 30 years, and I still to this day couldn't tell you where it is. I was only there once. He was teaching my aunt how to shoot a gun. I remember her shoulder rocking back with the impact of the shot, and it surprising her. He had these weird flamenco dancing clothes in his closet. It was all seemingly harmless. I mean, everyone has their quirks, I guess. About 10 days, maybe 2 weeks later, we were again at the pier out by the payphones, talking about what to do that night and what to get for dinner. JR and my aunt were in their late 20s or early 30s, and as much as she loved me, I imagine there were times that I got a bit in the way. Well, anyway, we were at the pier and he was talking about how he has these painkillers. He offered me one. I declined, of course, and told him that I had a high tolerance to pain anyway and didn't really need that stuff. He then, with a huge smile, asked me if he can see for himself, assuring me that he won't really hurt me, and he's just trying to have fun. This bastard twists my arm behind my back until I hear a pop. I start to cry and he laughs and says, "Oh, sweetheart, I was only playing. You said you had a high tolerance. I guess I was a bit stronger than I thought. I'm sorry, there's no need to ruin the good time we're all having." I go to the private pier office, which my granddad managed, crying. My aunt comes in and lets me know that she thinks it's fucked up too, and that she talked to him about it. She goes back outside and he asks her what she's up to that night. She tells him that she isn't sure if I'm staying over because of what just happened. I was whining about going home, and I was pissed that she hadn't decked him right there for hurting me. Well, he tells her that she should meet him under, let's call it the Sunset Bridge, at 2 a.m. on the other side of town. He says that the stars are beautiful, and you can listen and hear the fish. He tells her he would love to see it with her and they can dance under the moon. We were all from a fishing family and live in a fishing town, so fish activities under the bridge at late times wasn't necessarily something that threw up a red flag. If it's dark and late, there won't be other people around hogging all of the fish. She tells him maybe, and then we leave. I decide to spend the night after all, later sneaking in only if she will pick up my boyfriend Charlie. She calls him when she gets home, before we made our arrangement about Charlie, and says that she can come, but she'll have to have me with her. He groans and says, "Fine, alright. I guess she can come too. Maybe she'll get tired and sleep in the car or something." About an hour after she called JR the first time, I ask her about Charlie and she agrees. She sits down with me and hugs me and touches my face lovingly, apologizing for what he did to my arm. My aunt was an amazing woman, and I love her very much. She then calls him again and tells him not to worry. She's picking up Charlie, so I'll have my own entertainment and they can have their time. He goes into a rage and starts sputtering and cursing about how it's too complicated now. He just wanted to have an intimate meeting with her and not some damn family reunion. He went on about how he didn't want to have to babysit a 13-year-old kid and her 14-year-old boyfriend. He hangs up after calling her a crazy bitch. She bewilderingly hung up the phone and told me what happened, and we went about our night with pizza rolls and PlayStation. He calls her a few more times and drives by the house for a couple of weeks, but my aunt was having none of it. After a while, he left our lives just as swiftly as he had come. The whole affair lasted only about a month, if even that. 3 weeks, maybe. And all in all, it wasn't the craziest experience she's had with a man. JR was soon forgotten, and we went about our business. Flash forward 2 years later. I'm almost out of middle school by now. My aunt had moved to a city about 40 miles away. I still lived with my grandparents, and they were still strict, but as they had gotten older, so had I. I knew a few ways around the rules. One day my friend Frank and I missed the bus home from school, and called our good high school friend Darla to pick us up and take us home after riding around a bit. She had this big, beautiful red truck, and I would ride around in the cab of it, loving the freedom and the wind. We were smoking cigarettes and laughing, listening to the radio. The time I would have spent on the bus before my stop was just enough time to hit up the taco drive-thru. We cruised down the road a bit before heading back to Frank and I's separate houses. He lived just down the road. We had a lot of fun that day, and she dropped me off first. My grandparents came outside. They were heavily confused at the sight of an unknown vehicle, and even more so when they saw that I had gotten out of it. After letting her be the one to explain because she was older, cooler, and more responsible, my parents thanked her for being kind enough to take me home. They said how lucky I was that she just happened to be there to help me get home. The things we do to our parents, eh? That was the last time I ever saw my friend. She didn't show up for work for 5 days. I can't speak for everyone, but I assumed she had just run away. Darla's parents were going through a nasty divorce. The dad had a hot new girlfriend, and the mother was very bitter about it. Rightfully so, I guess. It was embarrassing for all of the kids. Her truck wasn't left behind, so I figured she got tired of her parents acting like infants and took off. I missed her, but she was in a whole nother league of freedom and coolness. 16 is a whole different life than 14, especially when you're in different schools. I wished her well, maybe even was a bit envious that she got out of this town and I was still here. I hadn't heard anything for 2 weeks about her, when at about 9 at night, my grandparents got a phone call to turn on the news. Darla's body was found out in the woods. She had been strangled to death and just left out there. I don't even know for how long. I was devastated. I was joyful that I had that last experience with her, but also saddened and horrified. She was so young, barely older than myself. She was about to be 17 in just a short time. It was a very sad time for our town. The good and bad news is that they caught the guy who had done it. He confessed after some very incriminating evidence, and during his questioning also confessed to killing his girlfriend, who had been missing for about 8 years. Also his father, staging his death to look like a suicide by hanging. When they showed his mugshot on the screen and said his name, I swear I almost passed out. There, clear as day on the screen, staring back at me, was a picture of JR. I had no idea they even knew each other. I can't imagine what would have happened if we had gone under the bridge that night. Investigation Discovery Channel did a piece on it a couple of years back, and I was shocked to see it on the TV. The memories came rushing back, and I decided to write it all down. I literally have a newfound appreciation of life now that I'm old enough to understand just how close I could have come to being killed. Before the story, just some quick notes. Keep in mind the story happened over the span of only a month and a half, and everything happened quite quickly. For context, my name will be Kat, his name will be John, and his mom's name is Karen. This is a story I've only ever told a handful of people, and I'll try to be as clear and accurate as I can, as this happened just over a year ago, but obviously I can't remember everything verbatim. I know I've made mistakes, and I'll probably mention it a few times, but honestly, I've criticized my own decisions a million times over, and it's not useful to think about what could have been done. About a year ago, I had just gone through a bad breakup. He dumped me over text on Valentine's Day, and after having been together for quite a while, this was a big shock. I was absolutely devastated, and felt pretty bad about myself. I only took about 2 weeks before I was looking for another boyfriend, more or less a rebound guy, and that's when I met John. We met on Tinder and instantly hit it off. I was in my first year of university, studying biology, and he was in his first year of a different university studying history. He was smart and friendly, and had a lot of common interests with me. He was giving me some weird vibes, but maybe it was that he just seemed a bit desperate. Honestly, I was too after my bad breakup, so I decided to push it out of my mind. After only a few days of talking, he asked me to go on a date with him to a play. I was so excited because that was such an interesting date idea, and I thought it was pretty romantic. We go on the date, and it goes pretty well. He rides the subway back a few stops with me, and I tell him about my ex. He tells me that he can't believe anyone would let a pretty girl like me go, and that he would do anything to make sure he got to keep me if he were dating me. Having read the title, you can see how creepy that statement is now. But I was maybe naive, or just a bit happy that someone agreed that my ex was an asshole. I took it as a compliment and saw nothing wrong with it. We kept messaging and going on occasional dates after this, and all was well. After a few dates, John had told me that he had really bad depression and anxiety. It's important for me to mention that I also have pretty extreme depression and mental health problems, and my bad breakup kind of launched me into a downward spiral. It was almost a relief to hear him say that, because I felt like he wouldn't judge me for having depression too. After that, we could confide in each other about it, and help each other get out of our bad mental states. After this revelation, we got really close, really fast. We had only dated for a month, but we had already had an intense relationship, and I even thought that I loved him. Another problem with him was his mother, Karen. She was extremely possessive of him, and maybe it's because of his depression, but he couldn't do anything without telling his mother first. One night, he fell asleep at my place and forgot to set an alarm, and when he woke up, he had 10 missed calls and around 50 text messages from his mom trying to find him. She had apparently called every hospital in the area looking for him. She knew he was going to spend the night. She was just concerned because he slept 2 hours later than he said he would. She would do other things to manipulate him, like verbally abuse him or tell him he's a bad son if he doesn't do everything she wants. She set limits on how often and when he could come to my place. I wasn't happy with this, obviously. I told him I thought it was ridiculous how she treated him like a child, and that he was an adult and could go on dates whenever he wanted. If she wants to know where he is, that's fine, but he shouldn't have to ask permission. We had an argument about it, but he was obviously a mama's boy, so I dropped it. I still hadn't met his mom at this point, so who was I to judge? Another thing I'll mention is that one time he had asked me to do a role play with him, in which I wear his glasses and call him specifically Sweetie. He was very clear that he wanted me to call him that. He told me it was a teacher fetish, and I told him I wasn't into that kind of thing. He asked me a few times and never really dropped it, but I always said no. It comes back later. After one particularly bad night, he came over to console me, and I told him I was feeling really depressed. His response was to ask me to marry him. This was after only just 1 month of dating. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh. He just stared at me straight in my eyes. There was an awkward silence, and I stuttered out, "What?" He looked at me and said, "I'm serious. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you." I laughed and gave him a firm no. He looked disappointed, but he dropped it. I was a bit concerned about this, and confided in my friend. She said if it were her, she'd dump him. I thought it was quite strange, but really relied on the emotional support he gave me, and was very emotionally fragile at the time, so I decided to pretend it didn't happen. I'd like to mention I know I made mistakes and ignored red flags, but when I was with him, he often implied or even stated that I was too mentally unwell or unattractive to ever get anyone better than him, and said other manipulative things that made me feel like breaking up with him would only be bad for me. He often made comments about how he would kill himself if I ever broke up with him, and it would be all my fault. Yeah, what a great guy. But I thought I loved him at the time. A few days later, I went over to his place for the first time. He lived with his parents, so when his mom got home from work, I of course introduced myself. She seemed very skeptical of me and refused to shake my hand. She gave a big fake smile and said, "Hi." She started focusing all her attention on John. "Hi, sweetie," she said, giving him a big kiss right on the lips. Yeah. She also wore very similar glasses to him and called him Sweetie all night. That was basically the only thing she called him. Sound familiar to anything else I mentioned? I was very much creeped out, but I decided to keep my mouth shut for now. His mom never spoke to me, only ever talking to me if it was necessary, and I got a very weird vibe off of her. I had only gone to her house and met her willingly one time more after this, and it basically went the exact same except this time I was doing homework, and she kept making comments about how I was stupid because I couldn't do my homework on my own. I tried to argue back with her and got called a bitch, but John shut us both down and we all moved on. His dad also lived there, but mostly said nothing, and lurked around in the background not saying much, or just staying in the basement. Fast forward a few days. I was still talking to John, but I think he sensed I was growing distant from him. We had been together about a month and a half at this point. I got a text from him very late night, telling me he was suicidal and needed me. I had a midterm the next day and told him I was sorry that I couldn't be there, as I needed to sleep and be at school in the morning for my midterm. He was very upset, however, so I suggested he go to the hospital and told him I could meet him there after I was done. He didn't respond, and after a half hour I get a text from him. He tells me he's outside my residence building, and his mom drove him. I told him again that I couldn't go to his place. He says it's okay and that he just wanted to talk. I gave in and went outside to meet him and go for a walk. He just starts walking me in the direction of the parking lot. I got a very bad feeling in my stomach. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt very scared. I said to him, why don't we walk this way? And tried to turn and go in the other direction. No, it's fine. He grabbed my arm very tightly. I don't know what else to do, so I say, John, you're making me really uncomfortable. Why are you taking me to the parking lot? He said nothing and kept walking in silence. I tried to pull my arm away, but he tightened his grip. I called his name loudly. but he just kept telling me that it was okay. "Let me go home, John," I say, firmly pulling on my arm. No one else was around to help me, and I was very scared. "I don't think you want to do that," he said, emotionless. I was about to cry at this point, and I was so confused and scared. He starts explaining. "Listen, Kat, my mom is in the driveway, and if you don't get in the car soon, she's going to call the police and tell them you're suicidal. The police will come here and cause a scene, and then hold you against your will." My brain started going a million miles a minute. I lived in university residence, and really didn't want the police to pick me up where everyone could see me and cause a scene. I had also been to the hospital before, and my school had warned me of possible repercussions if I tried to harm myself on campus again, which he reminded me of. I was really confused and felt betrayed. However, quickly weighing the pros and cons in my head, I thought supporting my boyfriend when he needs me and not causing a scene would be the easiest thing to do, still not realizing what he was trying to do. I tell him I'm not happy and that he's blackmailing me, and that I don't want to be with him if he's going to treat me this way. But the threats continue, so I go to his car. I get there, and there's his evil mother, Karen, with the most disgusting, ugly smirk on her face. "I was just about to call the police," she says. John stands behind me as I get in the back of the car, and he gets in the front. She starts to drive. As the shock wore off, I realized that I was fucking pissed off. I started yelling that they were manipulating me, and go off on Karen for manipulating her son and being a bad mother, and him for being a bad boyfriend. Meanwhile, Karen is screaming at me that I'm a slut and a bad girlfriend, and that I should kill myself because I'm such a bad influence for John. We had one of the most intense arguments I've ever had. I hate confrontation, and I honestly didn't know I was capable of so much rage, but adrenaline and fear does crazy things to people. Karen then pulls over the car. "Get out," she says. I lunge at the door ready to run away. "But I'll call the police on you," I hesitate. "Who will they believe? A reliable older lady with a respectable job, or a slutty little autistic hood rat like you? Especially with your history of mental health." And then she laughs. The situation dawned on me. I couldn't leave. While I hesitated to think, my hand still on the door handle, she escalated her threats from telling the police I was suicidal to telling the police in my school that I had assaulted her and her son after he tried to break up with me, even though the car was parked and the door was unlocked. I couldn't leave. In my car, you don't get to talk to me like that, so either be civil and quiet or get the fuck out. John stayed quiet throughout this whole car ride, not defending himself or his mother, nor helping me, just stone cold and expressionless. I started sobbing and crying and begging her to please let me go, to which she said, "You have every right to leave." I felt like I had no options, so I swallowed my pride, apologized to the disgusting Karen, and let myself get driven to their house. I tried texting my friend what was going on, but she wouldn't answer. Once we got there, it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I wasn't sure because of course my phone had died. Great timing. Karen had been taunting me and making fun of me the whole ride home, and I wasn't even able to defend myself after her new threats. I was still crying and John pulled me out of the car. He held on to me as I went inside. I don't know if it was because he wanted to get me in quickly, or because I could barely move because I was crying so hard, but they kept shushing me, and Karen raised her hand as if to slap me if I didn't shut up. I stifled my tears. Once we got inside, John brings me straight into his room. He asks if it's normal, if I wanted to watch a movie, but I just laid down on his bed and sobbed. He sits beside me and touches my arm in what could have been a comforting way under different circumstances. I pull away as he just quietly watches videos, and occasionally tells me how this was for the best. Now I couldn't hurt myself as long as he was protecting me, and we could be safe together. His dad was home, but the whole time everything was happening, he said nothing to me, and only came into John's room one time to give me a strange look and then leave immediately. John's mom came in a while later and told me to sit up and stop crying, saying it was the best for me and John. She was only doing this because she cared about us. I don't have anything to say to her, so I just pet their dog and didn't make eye contact. She berates and insults and makes fun of me, with no reaction other than a few snide comments from me that John would tell me were uncalled for, and more tears and silence. I can take an insult, but she crossed the line when she started talking about how my mother was abusive and how I deserved it, and she could see why I got abused. My mother may have been abusive, but that crossed the line. She had no right to talk about that, and John had no right to share my privacy with her. She then went on to say that she was a much better mother, and that I should be grateful she was giving me this privilege. The whole time I was there, she kept implying that this was in some sick way supposed to help me. I feel like I was only there for John to have someone with him, though. I lost it at the comments about my mom and started yelling at her about how she's abusive, and worse than my mother, and that I hated her. We have a screaming match for a while. After more insults and yelling, she storms off. It's just me and John, and I tell him I'm breaking up with him and want to leave now. He goes to get his mom, who says I'm having a rough night and don't mean it. We should both just sleep. John gives me pajamas to wear, and I get dressed in his closet and go to bed. He was sleeping beside me. I was uncomfortable sleeping beside him because I felt betrayed and scared, even violated. I wanted to leave more than anything. I felt like an animal in a cage. I got up and bolted to the front door, only for him to run behind me and grab me and have Karen block my way. I started screaming, "Let me go, please. I'm sorry." I was sobbing and trying to be as clear as I could through my tears. Karen looked at me like I was the most disgusting thing she'd ever seen. "Grow up," she said, and walked off. John brought me back to his room and locked the door. His mom came back and he let her in a few minutes later. She had some kind of pill to help me sleep. I refused to take it. She kept insisting, but I kept resisting. "I'm not trying to poison you," she kept shouting, but I didn't trust her. John took one first to prove they were safe, and it was clear after over an hour of arguing and John taking one that I wasn't going to have a choice. I pretended to take one at first, but the stupid bitch checked my mouth and made sure I actually swallowed it. Basically shoved it down my throat after she realized I didn't take the other one. After a while, I felt very tired and fell asleep. I still don't know what she gave me, but they tasted awful, and was the kind to dissolve under my tongue. I woke up the next morning and John and his mom were both in the kitchen eating breakfast. I saw my chance. I was alone. I got dressed hella fast and pulled my phone where he had hidden it, still not charged. It had my fare card for public transport in the case though, so I pocketed my phone and quickly snuck to the door. Nothing had ever been so intense for me before. I put on my shoes really quick and opened the door and ran as fast as I could. I ran like the fucking wind, on the verge of tears and shaking. I had never run so fast. I didn't know the neighborhood, and I didn't know how to get home, but I just needed to get away. I have no idea if they chased me or not, or even if they noticed right away. The dog stayed quiet. I found a bus stop and got on the first bus to show up. I pulled out my card tab, and it didn't have any money on it. My brain just buzzed. I had no way to get home. I needed to be on this bus. The bus driver shrugged and just said, "You should have had money." Meanwhile, I was staring at my card. I started sobbing, and I practically fell over as I was crying so hard, trying to explain what was happening. I made no sense, and the bus driver said, "Whoa, are you okay?" I said no and started crying harder. He just quietly handed me a transfer, and I thanked him and sat down quickly, noticing everyone staring at me. I didn't know how to get home, but I realized the bus was going to a subway station, and even though it was a long ride, I could get home from there. As soon as we got there, I ran onto the subway still crying and shaking. I probably looked like quite the sight. The subway eventually got to my school. Then I realized I couldn't go home. John knew where I lived and he could have called the police. I didn't know what to do, and I saw someone with a phone charger. I ran over and asked if they could please charge my phone, that it was an emergency. Typical millennial me didn't know my friend's phone number. I charged my phone, face covered in tears, and probably smudged mascara, and immediately texted my friend. I told her right before my phone died that John and Karen wouldn't let me leave their car, and she had sent quite a few messages and had apparently tried to come to my house to look for me too. I told her where I was and asked if I could go to her place. I got many messages from John as well. John tried saying he tried to kill himself, that he needed me, that I needed him, that I was making a huge mistake. Absolutely anything and everything to try and make me respond. I know you guys will judge me for this, but I went to visit him in the hospital. I don't know why after all that I decided to do this, but I did. After I got to the ER, his mom then told the nurse that I was also threatening suicide and needed to be put on suicide watch too. The nurse took me aside and asked me, and of course I said no. I was legally an adult, so they couldn't take Karen's word over mine and didn't hospitalize me. I told John we were over, and I hoped he would get better soon. But he was mad at me. He said his mom told him how I was suicidal, and how she said that she heard the nurses talking to each other about how I was lying to get attention, and all this other BS. I tried to defend myself, but I just left defeated, gave Karen the middle finger, and ran the fuck out and never looked back. I crashed at my friend's place and slept on her floor for over a week. A while later, I got a text from one of John's friends, basically insinuating he killed himself and that it was my fault. I told the guy that after what that family did to me, they could all go to hell, and to never message me again. I blocked the number. I have no idea if John is alive or not to this day, but I did get some revenge in the end. A story for another day, I suppose. As you well might have noticed, I didn't call the police. I did speak to an officer about it eventually, and my concerns about how Karen would be more reliable than me and how I didn't have much evidence. They said if I wanted I could file a report, but honestly I never did. I wanted nothing to do with them ever again. My sister doesn't have a Reddit account, but as a long-time reader with no material of my own to post, I thought her story would work well for this sub. My sister has been married for several years, and this is the first time she genuinely felt unsafe in her own home. Her husband was finishing up school, and they had just had a baby, so she was pretty sleep-deprived. She's honestly gotten sick, and my brother-in-law wanted her to get some decent rest, so he stayed with the baby in the living room and the nursery to take care of her while my sister slept. My parents wanted to see the baby, so my brother-in-law came over to our house for a bit and just let my sister rest. It should be noted that my brother-in-law is extremely paranoid, even though we live in a low-crime area. Since he's from a sketchy Midwestern town, I guess it makes sense. He makes sure that the doors and windows are locked before leaving, and half wakes my sister up to let her know he's going to our house with the baby, and that he'll pick up some dinner on the way back. My sister sleepily agrees and falls back asleep. Fast forward a couple of hours. My sister has to wake up to breastfeed/breast pump because her chest is starting to hurt. She prolongs this and tosses and turns for a while because she was still exhausted and didn't quite want to get up. Once she starts coming to, she realizes that the house is super cold. Once she actually opens her eyes, she hears the front door shutting, but she's still super out of it. Assuming it's her husband, she calls out his name, but gets no answer. The room is pitch black, and all of the other lights in the house are off, so she can't see anything. Suddenly, she gets a really horrible feeling, which she can only describe as stepping into a freezing shower. She gets up and checks the thermostat, which was fine. She assumes she just feels cold because she's sick. She turns on some lights and does a quick turn about the house, and realizes no one else is home and the front door is still locked. This obviously freaks her out, and she texts her husband to ask when he'll be home. He gets home not long after. They have dinner, and he stays with the baby in the living room and sleeps on the couch. My sister notices that one of the windows in the bedroom is open, and says that she doesn't remember opening it. That would explain why she was so cold earlier. Her husband makes sure to check that all the windows are shut, and the door is locked after my sister explains to him the weird feeling she got earlier. Later she wakes up again at around 2 a.m. to pump, and that disgusting feeling creeps up again. She shoots up out of bed and can barely make out someone standing right at the foot of the bed. She thinks it's her husband, since it's a similar height and build, so she asks him to bring her some water while she's prepping to pump. The figure doesn't move or speak. She repeats herself, and in what she describes as the most terrifying moment of her life. The figure answered her. No, go back to sleep. I like watching you sleep." The voice definitely did not belong to my brother-in-law. She turns on her desk lamp and starts screaming at a person wearing all black. He just starts giggling. Her husband jolted out of his sleep, and she scrambled for the knife she had in her table. The dude booked it out of the window. He opened it and climbed through. She knows for sure that he was watching her sleep earlier when she was napping, and that it was probably him that she had seen shutting the bedroom door earlier. They called the police and filed a report, and nothing really came of it because he technically didn't do anything besides trespassing. They said they couldn't be sure if they could charge him with breaking and entering, because my sister doesn't remember if she opened the window or not. Idiots. They have no idea how he didn't injure himself when he jumped out of the window, because when my brother-in-law ran out back to give chase, he had already disappeared. It's been a few years, and nothing ever really came of the investigation. They had the windows and locks replaced. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I have a little bit of an update here for you guys. I've recently started streaming a little bit on Twitch. I don't know if you guys are interested in just hanging out and seeing a bit of gameplay of maybe Monster Hunter or some games like that, maybe a few horror games, but I'll leave a link to my Twitch in the description of the video below. As always, if you guys like the video, please leave a comment or perhaps like or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you'd like to message me or you'd like to send in a story for me to read or you have a suggestion for a story I should read, the links to all of my social media will be in the description of the video below as well. This includes my Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, and now, of course, my Twitch account. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. But please, guys, be patient, because I do get a lot of messages, so if I don't respond to you right away within like a week or two, just be a little patient. I'll get to it as soon as I can. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the description of the email or message what the name of the story is, what the category of the story is, and how you would like to be credited in the video that the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the music used in this video, links to the music and the order in which the music appears will always be in the description below the video, so you can go ahead and check that out there. Last but not least, if you guys do enjoy my content, please take a look at my Patreon, and if you feel so inclined, maybe donate like $1 or something. Every little bit helps. It'll never be necessary, but of course, it's always an option if you guys would like to support the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.